Today we're going to be looking at the 4th generation Supra as well as the engine swap variant, which uses the M158 AMG motor out of the Pagani Huayra. The Supra was originally not a standalone car, but was actually a trim level of the Celica. In Japan they didn't even call it a Supra initially, it was called a Double X, but once it went worldwide it was known as the Celica Supra. The 2nd generation was more the same, with a Celica Supra as an optional variant over the base Celica. But by the 3rd generation, the Supra broke off of the Celica and became its own vehicle, much like how the GTR is no longer affiliated with the Skyline. The 3rd generation Supra picked up 500 pounds, so it started becoming quite a heavy car, but they did add the turbocharger as an option, as well as in the final year of production it got the 1JZ motor, which is the 2.5 variant of the 2JZ that we're all familiar with. The Mark III Supra is in Gran Turismo, so we'll talk more about that in a future video. In order to avoid making the same mistake, Toyota took significant efforts to keep the weight down on the 4th generation. They used aluminum on the hood and targa top, as well as the cross members and the suspension components. They also used a single exhaust pipe instead of dual exhaust. All of this together added up to 200 pounds of saving over the previous generation, even though more features such as airbags were added to the 4th generation. Japan was having a lot of success financially as well as a country, so this left Toyota with a lot of money to develop a new motor, and that's what they used to over-engineer the 2JZ, which was actually a response to Nissan's new RB26 engine that was used in the Skyline. Ironically enough, the Tom's Castrol Supra that ended up winning the JGTC GT500 class ended up using a 3S GT inline 4 that came from the Celica rally car because of the lighter weight of the overall engine, and this allowed the Supra to have a better weight distribution on the car itself. It's also worth noting that the Supra we're using here now in the blue is actually using the AMG motor. My brother had pointed out that the boost gauge which is in the vehicle was part of the Japanese market but not available in the US. Also, the Recaro seats with their colorful pattern are very Japanese. I also thought it was interesting that they did a radio delete on this car. I was curious about the top speed, so I brought both cars to the test track. The silver car here is powered by the 2JZ and ended up with the top speed at 239 miles per hour. When we swapped over to the M158 AMG motor, we ended up hitting 255 miles an hour. So not a huge difference. Let's see where they end up on the list. The silver car again is the 2JZ version, and I actually found this car a little bit more difficult to drive. I have the same setup as the engine swap variant, as I usually build the engine swap suspension and then transfer it to the slower car, just because it seems to work out pretty well that way. But I don't know if I was just a little bit more aggressive on the throttle with this car, but I actually struggled with it a little bit. Even with all Toyota's efforts, the Supra is still a relatively heavy car. So it's powerful, it's great in a straight line, and it feels very planted throughout the courses. But the one thing I did notice is when you bring it into a wet surface, the car suffers from all of those attributes. The extra power makes it slip a lot easier, and the extra weight makes it push in the corners. Part of that weight is the 2JZ motor in itself. It was a cast iron block with aluminum heads. Even though with the engine swap we're doubling the displacement from 3 liters to 6 liters, we only pick up 57 pounds with the exchange. The Supra with the stock motor ends up running out of fuel after 3 laps, and ended up putting about 10% tire wear to the front and about 25% to the rear. So it's a car that's powerful, but it is going to drink a lot of fuel. As you might expect for a car that's been used in a lot of drag racing applications, this car really works well on tracks with long straights that can take advantage of the powerful motor and the straight line speed. We're coming up on the final stretch here. Even in the base form, this car is very impressive, so it makes sense that the 2JZ was one of the early engine swaps. The car ended up with a 1 minute 54 seconds .289. So let's go ahead and pull the 2JZ out and throw in the AMG motor. The Supra that we just ran ended up right behind the Ferrari 458 and in front of the Alfa Romeo Giulia. The engine that we're using in this car right now came from the Huayra, which is actually our current #1 on the board. So I have pretty high expectations for this car. Many younger car enthusiasts give the Fast and the Furious series credit for the Supra's success, but racers were well aware of the potential of the Supra long before the movies were ever made. Supras were always desirable, but they struggled with their sales as their prices started to increase. By '95, the Supra Turbo was $48,700, whereas a base model Corvette was $37,000 and had the rumble of the V8, which Americans enjoy. But even though sales suffered enough to make the Supra leave the American market, the car never really depreciated, and owning one was almost like having money in the bank. Now when it comes to this AMG powered Supra, the fuel economy ended up being almost identical with the car getting 3 laps. The front tires wore 10%, much like the 2JZ variant, and the tires in the rear wore a little bit more aggressively at 33%, but that's due to the extra power that the car has. The car ended up picking up 200 horsepower and 250 foot-pounds of torque while only gaining 57 pounds. So it's really a good way to go if you end up getting that Huayra motor. This car is a great platform for it. This car feels like it has more potential if I put more time into the tune and got a little bit more used to it, but we ended up with a 1 minute 51 seconds .403, which puts it in 3rd place behind the Corvette C7 and right in front of the Ferrari F40. Anyway, the car still handles well and it's a blast to drive, so if you pick up this motor, throw it in the car and it is a great drive. So enjoy, and I'll have the tunes here in just a moment. Thank you and have a great night.